meeting of our PAC. And so we're going to now have a fun short video. So Terrian, take it away with the video.
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should mute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice for public comment guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Okay, thank you so much. And Terrian, if you would not mind, let's do a roll call of who is present this evening.
Thank you. I didn't see Member Allen, but I did see Member Foley. For Allen.
I am here.
Thank you. Member Haskew.
Here.
Member Hernandez.
Here.
Member Mitchoff.
Here.
Member Obringer. I did not see. Member Perkins.
Here.
Member Ross. He said that he may be late. Member Stepper.
Here.
Member Storer.
Here.
Vice Chair Nowak.
Here.
Chair Anderson.
I'm here.
And I saw a few coming in, so just wanted to make sure. I saw Member Allen come in. And so it looks like we have Member Obringer and Member Ross absent.
Okay, great. Well, we definitely have a quorum. And so we're going to move along with the agenda and start out with any public comment. I'm going to ask Terrian if we've received any written public comment.
We have not received any written public comment.
Okay, and for those who are present with us virtually, does anyone have any public comment? And I also will remind you to mute yourself as you're speaking. And so I am looking at our participant list to see if I see any hands up. I am not seeing any participants with their hands up. So it appears we do not have any public comment for items not on tonight's agenda, but under the purview of this committee. So we do have one item on our consent calendar, and that is the approval of the minutes from our June 30th, 2021 meeting. Do we have anyone who would like to move that item?
So moved.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay, and we have a motion and a second. Terrian, would you mind doing a roll call vote?
Yes, Member Allen.
Yes.
Member Haskew.
Yes.
Member Hernandez.
Yes.
Member Mitchoff.
Yes.
Member Perkins.
Yes.
Member Ross. Member Stepper.
Yes.
Member Storer.
Yes.
Vice Chair Nowak.
Yes.
Chair Anderson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously with Obringer and Ross absent.
Okay, so let's go on and to our regular agenda items then. And the first item for discussion is informational. It is going to be presented by Stephanie Hu to provide an update on our Innovative 680 program. So Stephanie.
Good evening, Chair. I'm going to pull up the slides Please confirm you guys can see.
We can see the
Yep,
slide.
I see the thumbs up. Great, thank you. So good evening, everyone. Again, Stephanie Hu, Director of Projects of CCTA. We'll be providing a program and a project update to y'all this evening. I think I skipped one. One sec. No, I didn't. Okay, there you go. So this slide should look very familiar to you. This is the slide where we show the program goals, and the program is a performance-based program with a comprehensive corridor-wide approach. And this just shows that the program goals of, okay, sorry, distracted by Zoom prompts. The goals include improving safety, efficiency, and reliability of I-680 while preparing the corridor for the future, as well as providing accessible mobility options to encourage mode shift and improving our air quality along the corridor. And these are the initial 6 projects that are currently being developed, and they're all in different stages of project development, which I will go over in the next slide. I want to just spend a few minutes to highlight some notable updates that we've completed or accomplished during these few months that we've been away for the 6 projects. For the Northbound Express Lane project, which is proposing to complete the Express Lane gap on Northbound 680 between Navorna and the Benicia Martinez Bridge. This project continues to work on the feasible mitigation strategies for VMT, and the team is also coordinating with Caltrans on the traffic operations analysis report and the geometrics of our alternatives. For the part-time transit lane, CCTA continues to work with California Transit Association on legislation on the part-time transit lane, but which is now called Transit Bus on Shoulder, or TBOS. Caltrans also recently released the guidance for TBOS, and the team is reviewing the guidance. CCTA is also working with other county transportation authorities in the Bay Area to submit a joint comment letter. The guidance also provided some definition and criteria in implementing TBOS, and the team has determined that the project will focus on the northbound direction between Bollinger Canyon Road and Ignacio Valley Road. The traffic analysis and the forecast on the southbound direction didn't meet the TBOS eligibility or warrants the TBOS implementation. So we'll be focusing on the northbound for our work at the moment. The project team is anticipating the draft project initiation document that will need Caltrans approval in March. The Share Mobility Hubs team has been working on the Mobility Hub Toolkit, which is essentially a catalog of mobility features and services by facilities, and that has been completed. We had a TAC meeting this month, and the team reviewed the background issues and identification report with the TAC members, and that report is currently in the hands of the TAC for review. And the team from Share Mobility Hubs is also supporting our TIRCP application for the Express Bus project, which I will go over in the next slide. Moving on to the Automated Driving System, or ADS project, that team continues to collaborate with UC Berkeley and the vendors on use cases. And they're also working on replacing the shared autonomous vehicle vendor due to the recent closure of Local Motors. The Mobility as a Service, or MOS project, continues to develop components of the mobile app that will provide various mobility options. The team is working on the user interface design and also working with vendors on car share, micro-mobility, and rewards incentives program. And then lastly, the Advanced Technology Program, which is currently consisting of the Coordinated Adaptive Ramp Metering, or CARM. The team completed and received approval for the project initiate document from Caltrans in a record time of 3 months, which is unheard of. So really kudos to that team for completing it on time and on way earlier. The rush was really to be in time to program $25 million in STIP for the construction phase. Since then, we have completed or executed a co-op with Caltrans to begin the project approval environmental document phase. While the first phase of CARM will be focusing on the northbound direction between El Costa and Olympic, the team has started to develop a strategy or plan for full corridor implementation. So this next slide shows 2 new projects that we have included into the program. The first one is the I-680 Express Bus project. This will be a 1-seat express bus ride service that will be implemented between the Dublin, Pleasanton BART station and the Martinez Amtrak station. As I mentioned earlier, we are working on a TIRCP, which is the Transit Intercity Rail Capital Program grant application, which is due in early March. The application effort is led by CCTA, but we are partnering with County Connection and LAFTA on the effort. The application includes funding requests for a hydrogen bus fleet, fueling station, and elements that would support the bus service, which includes 3 shared mobility hubs, transit bus on shoulder implementation, and then research and development of first mile, last mile strategies and training for transit bus on shoulder at Momentum Station. The second project that we're adding to the program or have added to the program is the I-680 Coordinated Adaptive Traffic Signal System, which is a component of the larger countywide connected signal system project. We're hoping to leverage the funding opportunity we have at the upcoming OBAC Cycle 3 funding opportunity. CCTA will be putting together a project for countywide connected signals, and we'll be focusing on the routes of regional significance. You may be aware that outreach efforts have started at the RTPC level. The planning department has been making presentations to the TAC and the RTPC boards, as well as our technical coordinated committee in January. We also have outreach efforts to the local jurisdiction to create an inventory of the local's existing traffic system. The project nominations are due to MTC in September 2022, and we should be hearing their project selection by January of 2023. Okay, that's my last slide. So happy to take any questions, but I can take this down.
Thank you for taking that down so we can see everybody. Does anyone have any questions, comments? Let's start with members of the committee first. And if you want to raise your hand virtually or in real, Deb Allen, it looks like your real hand is up as opposed to your virtual hand.
Yeah, for some reason, I don't have a virtual hand with CCTA. It's the only agency. But just one quick question on the I-680. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation and all the work. I mean, there's a lot of work underway, and thank you, Stephanie, for doing that in a very concise and succinct manner. But on the 680 Express Bus project, I'm just curious if you can talk a little bit more about why the plan is to go between Amtrak and the Dublin Pleasanton station and not Amtrak and, say, Pleasant Hill or Walnut Creek.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I could try to condense my presentation, so happy to provide more details. So this bus project came out of as a recommendation from a CalSTA study that was led by LAFTA, and that Tri-Valley Hub study recommended that a express bus between Dublin BART station and Martinez be a bus service that would bridge the gap between the two rail system or a gap in the state rail plan. The mobility hubs that I spoke of earlier, those are actually going to be stops that the express bus will stop at. So they include a mobility hub at Bollinger Canyon Road in San Ramon, Walnut Creek BART station, to your question, and then the endpoint of Amtrak station Martinez. So they do stop at a BART station. Sorry if I neglected to provide more detail. Hopefully that's the question.
Great, thank you. Great question. Other questions by members? I have one question too, and it was just the metrics that you were talking about as we were looking at the bus on shoulder, the T-Bus. Southbound, you said the numbers just aren't there to justify having T-Bus or using that. How far off are we? And at what point in time did the traffic study that came up with those numbers start? I'm assuming post-COVID?
It's a existing condition and forecast.
Okay.
Right. So they do look out, I believe, 10 years.
Okay.
That to see if we meet the criteria is that the main line will go over 35 miles per hour consistently, like a recurrent congestion.
Okay.
And then that congestion would last longer than an hour. And the team had found that southbound just doesn't exhibit those type of heavy congestion like northbound does.
Okay, even in the morning.
Even even in the morning.
Okay. And again, pre-pandemic, it certainly appeared to, and I know post-pandemic, all of our traffic patterns have shifted. Okay, other comments or questions by committee members or members of the public, please feel free to raise your hand virtually, or I'll skim through. I'm not seeing any real hands up either. Okay, well, Stephanie, you clearly gave such a great presentation. No one has any questions, and I'll just ask Terry, and have we received any written public comments from anyone?
We have not received any written public comments.
Okay, then let's move on to our next informational item. And Liz Justison, Danielle Stanislaus are going to talk to us about the development of the Innovate 680 program concept of operations and its related policy issues and our next steps. So let's have Danielle and Liz take it from here.
Thank you, Chair Anderson. Stephanie, will you pull up the slides?
Yes, I will do so. 1 second.
So tonight we're going to be coming to you with 3 new policy issues we want to get your feedback on and your take on. But before we get started on those, the first couple of slides you have seen before, and we'll just jump right into those, which are kind of just a reminder of what all is happening on Innovate 680 and what it takes to get this going from a physical standpoint, and then how those policy issues kind of layer onto it. So next slide. Keep going. So you guys have seen this slide, I think 6 times. And I keep bringing it back every single time because it's really important for everybody to understand, as you saw the 6 projects lay out, that in order for those projects to come together as a holistic program, it requires that all of these systems are talking to one another seamlessly. And so we put this out here to kind of remind everybody of there's a big technical jump that we have to make and a lot of policy issues on top of this, so that end user has a seamless experience as they're going from project to project, which are projects for us, but in the end should be connections between all these different modes so that they have a nice, not separated out pieces of their trip. So in order to make that happen, we're going to have to make all these different systems talk to one another in real time. Next slide. Oh, and I think it's actually, thank you for doing, I forgot they had this little animation. It's really kind of important that we always kind of remember what that red box is. That is kind of our advanced technology system, and it's the core of the system. I like to think of it as the brain. It's where everything comes together. You're getting information from all the different projects, all the different system components to come together, get good pieces of data, make decisions, and spit it out to the other systems. So as we go through some of the policy decisions we've already talked about, it's important to remember that core red is kind of where all the data is coming together and all these critical decisions are happening. Next slide. So a couple of policy assumptions we've been working with so far. I'm just going to quickly go through these. We've shown them to you a couple of times, but they're just good reminders that we have already talked about the need to have a decision support system that is centralized for the entire corridor. So what this means is there's going to be one head-end system that is getting information from BART, from the buses, from the arterials, from the freeway, and figuring out how all the other systems need to react. Is there a really bad backup on an arterial and we need to start doing some different CARM to get everybody onto the freeway, and then maybe changing the express lane algorithm for the pricing? So that all has to come together into one centralized decision support system. And in order to do that, the second key policy assumption is that we're all sharing data, that everybody is coming together into one centralized data hub so that everybody can be, all the systems can be making real-time decisions, and all the operators are working in real time with real data as it's performing on the system. So these are just policy assumptions that we've talked about a couple of times before, but they're good baseline to remember as we go into some of the next policy discussions. There's one more slide, kind of the baseline. We've also talked about the need for delegated control. What that means is that one operator might delegate control of their system to another operator or a centralized operator. So I think a good example of this would be the Innovate system getting control of the pricing algorithm for the express lanes. So the express lanes might benefit from having real-time data of how the ramp meter, the CARM is working, and also how the arterials are working. And then it will have a smarter algorithm. So the express lanes might delegate the control to another system so that it's actually making the best decisions based upon real-time data that they might not have available in their own system. We're also assuming that's going to happen in real time and it'll be automated. I want to be careful to say that that doesn't mean there's not oversight and people aren't checking and making sure that things are safe and that good decisions are being made by the system. But this needs to happen within milliseconds. So the system is going to be making decisions based upon data it receives, real-time system operations, and then making changes to the system so that it will continue to perform as expected. Again, operators and there will be dashboards to help ensure that it's all running smoothly. And you could always have an operator override the system, but this is all going to happen in real time with systems making these decisions in split seconds. Lastly, that there needs to be some kind of operations center. It's really important that you have all of these systems working and performing, but that humans are able to override it. And that's going to be really critical as we talk about one of our policy decisions today in terms of incident management and making sure that we have some kind of operations center that is looking and understanding how the system's performing and making decisions to make changes if needed. Next one. So we've brought a lot of policy decisions to you before, and we're going to go through 3 of them today. So first, I want to highlight where we've kind of been in our discussions on policy, and then where we're going tonight with some of them. So the grayed out boxes are policies we've brought to you already. The blue boxes, the darker blue boxes, are ones that we still need to come to the pack with. And then the ones that are highlighted that are brighter blue are ones that we're going to be talking about this evening. So harmonizing freeway and arterial operations, incident management, and then we're going to do another look at additional O&M, so considerations. So we talked about that already, but we're going to revisit that topic and with a little bit of a different lens on that. So this is just a reminder of the things we've talked about so far and what we're going to talk about this evening. Slide. Okay, first one is harmonizing freeway and arterial operations. So each one of these, we're going to go through an overview, what's the issue, and then there's a little bit about additional considerations. Just keep your mind about how all these things kind of play off of one another. So I think at the crux of this is the need to kind of balance and manage how the arterials are operating and synchronizing with the freeway. I think CARM is a little bit at the heart of this and how that project gets implemented to make sure that those are working together in a comprehensive manner to really have the entire system perform for the best person throughput. And this means to maximize efficiency for every end user. So the issue is that while the system may be synchronizing and making all this happen for operations, there's still going to be some trade-offs amongst performance for different modes. And the system will ultimately be designed so that your end trip is faster. I think that's just an easier way to say it. It's more efficient, but you might have some perceived takeaways. And one way I like to think of this is if you are traveling on a bus and it is going on an arterial and then getting onto the bus on shoulder, you might end up taking 2 extra minutes while you're on the arterial, but you end up saving 3 or 4 minutes once you get on the freeway. So your end trip might be 2 minutes faster, but we as end users will still perceive a takeaway because we might be sitting in traffic for a little longer. So really the point of harmonizing is to ensure the total trip is the best for the entire network of systems. That doesn't mean that individuals might not experience little pieces or trade-offs, that in the end, you will have a more harmonized and faster system. The problem being, though, that we currently measure our performance by individual owner and agency. So people are incentivized to keep their individual portion of it being the most efficient. When what we're really trying to do is have the entire network of systems work in an efficient manner so that everybody is getting throughput. And I think one thing that we think of a lot of when we give examples of is buses and cars. But another component of this is including bikes and pets along this entire piece, because they are going to be users of the arterial system, and they need to be a consideration for how we're thinking about harmonizing and balancing and the takeaways that you might perceive when you're trying to put this all together into one harmonized system. So when we're thinking through this, we have to think through how well will the bus on shoulder work. Automated delegated control. Again, if you're having a whole system work together, you're going to have to let somebody else take over pieces and portions of that so that they're taking data and able to operate their systems. Looking at transit priority, which is a topic we talked about a couple times ago. Active transportation, that would be the bikes and peds. Equity from a geographic standpoint, equity from a mode standpoint, safety and reliability, and data sharing. So with all of these, we're going to go through each one of them, and then at the end, we'll have Danielle facilitate. So just think about this one, and we'll get to the next one. And it kind of builds the nice presentation tonight, because I think it builds to the ultimate policy number 3. So let's get into policy number 2, which is incident management. So incident management, I think, is really first and foremost in our minds. We think of crashes. We think of a 2-car pile up on the highway, or something that's happened. Somebody runs a light and there's an intersection that's down. But incidents are not just accidents. They include regular non-reoccurring congestion. They include planned special events. They include lane closures. These are all under the umbrella of incidents and incident management. So when we have those non-planned or non-reoccurring incidents, think crashes, the number one thing we have to preserve is safety. It's the first thing that comes to the mind of all the first responders, is the safety of their responders and the safety of the traveling public. So when we're going through incident management, safety is first, but that also means there's trade-offs for performance. So having to make sure we understand what those trade-offs are and how we can best manage those. And in order to do that, it really requires a coordinated response of everybody understanding what is the incident, how can we reroute to other jurisdictions, to other modes while there's an incident, and how do we get the system back up and performing once the incident has been cleared. So these are all trade-offs we have to consider when making good standard operating procedures for incident management. All of this requires coordinated, swift response by numerous first responders and numerous operators, and having a clear understanding of what the standard operating procedures are. And right now, the system is set up in such a way that all the modes are handled differently. So it's a real kind of hands-on phone call to phone call, looking at systems to coordinate and get the right kind of incident response to make sure that once the safety has been cleared and people are ready to, the system is ready to return, that everybody can do that in a safe and regimented way. That requires data sharing. It also has a lot to do with how we're going to harmonize an arterial and freeway, and understanding if there's an incident on the highway, we don't want to just flush everything to the arterials. That's not the right way to do it either. Coming up with a good coordinated response. It has a lot to do with O&M and how we're going to operate and maintain the system, and then allowing, again, automated and delegated control. So when we're thinking about incidents, I really want everybody to think about, 1, safety is first, but 2, it really requires pre-planning and then having all the right people coordinated and understanding their roles and responsibility to get the system back up to its standard performance. So that's policy number 2. Let's get into number 3, which is a little bit lengthier, and I have a little bit more background to kind of tee up the discussion on that one. The operations and maintenance needs of 680. And you saw the whole network of different systems that need to come together. So, and I'm sorry, I just got in, my internet is unstable, so I hope everybody can still hear me okay. So there's going to be a lot of needs for operations on this system. Each one of the 6 individual projects will have different needs for operations and maintenance, from individual operators operating the system to maintenance folks getting out there, to operating, physically looking at the system and making changes to the system, and then working with other jurisdictions to make sure that you're balancing how the system's working together. So there's a lot of needs. They're unique by project, but they're not unique in terms of the whole system, that the end goal is to have everything coordinated and operated in a way that is best for the end user. There's a lot of other considerations that we're going to have to keep coming back to you guys on O&M funding, how this gets done, because it's not a standard capital project that you're one and done, that there is a reoccurring cost to this. So there's a lot of discussions that we need to keep having on O&M. But today we want to take one particular slice of it. So if you go to the next slide, Stephanie. So this is the operations of the transportation system as it stands in the Bay Area today. And as you can see, it's pretty fragmented. So what this table is meant to do, and I hope it comes across, is that we basically have 4 main places in which the system that touches Innovate is operated out of today. And first, we have the state highway system. And for that, we have civil maintenance. We have the ITS and communications that's maintained. We have software that runs their ATMS, and then we have highway operations with the Caltrans District 4 TMC of operators sitting there operating the system. The arterials are done the same way. They have their own set of maintenance for both comms and the civil infrastructure. They have operations looking at signal timing and incident management. There's also express lane operations. Each one of the transit operators have their own different operation centers and needs for maintenance. And then there's overlaying regional systems like Clipper, Fast Track, and 511. And when you think about Innovate, it touches every single one of these existing O&Ms, but none of these are done in any kind of centralized way. They're done, and they're done well in their individual components, but right now they are fragmented. Next slide. So policy issue number 3, and this is just continuing the conversation around O&M. And this is really just hitting on that the existing operations and maintenance is fragmented in the Bay Area today, which doesn't naturally lend itself for a really holistic, sustainable approach to addressing the needs of 680 and making sure that we're addressing all modes. One of the ways to consider is to look at a possible regional transportation management center, where each one of the components that you saw on that existing table could have a seat at a table in a joint operations center. This is something that happens today in Houston at Transtar. The city and county of Honolulu just recently opened up their joint traffic management center. There's one in Albuquerque, a few examples on the East Coast. And each one of these have varying levels of engagement. Some of them, everybody is co-located in one facility. Some of them have really, it's the state, and then there's representatives from each of the other local and regional partners there. So there's different scales of this, but it is something that takes quite a bit of time to plan for and to fund and to implement. And it is something that would be a really great solution for Innovate 680, because as you have seen, all of these projects and all of the different components touch every single component that has existed in or is fragmented in its existing operations. But having this regional traffic management center would really allow for the 2 policy issues we just talked about, really supporting that kind of balanced harmonization, because you have operators working at the same place to try to balance the freeway and the arterial. And also for incident management. I think this is probably the most crucial part of it, is having a coordinated one place where everybody is when there's an incident, so you can plan and safely get everybody moving to their end destination once the incident has been relieved. So, but this doesn't exist in the Bay Area today. And it has existed in little tiny components, but as a real regional traffic management center, it doesn't exist. And it could be a decade before something like that would be able to be implemented. So one thing that would be a possibility, if you go to the next slide, Stephanie, is if we looked at a possible way to get to a sustainable operations for Innovate 680 through a stepped approach to a regional traffic management center. So what you see on the very left column are all the projects for Innovate 680. So the ones that Stephanie was giving an update on earlier today. And looking through each one of these existing projects, there's a natural place that might operate out of. But also, as you think about it, that doesn't lend itself to this holistic, really looking at it as a system of systems and how they all can start working together to just have a perfectly seamless travel. So thinking about it in terms of how could you get to something that's a little bit more regional. And when we say a regional traffic management center, I don't want you to think that this is necessarily something that's a brand new center. It could be an effort to start co-locating people in the same place, but that would need to be phased. So looking at a possible roadmap, and Stephanie, I think it highlights as you go through, thinking about the first projects that come in line, you can really start thinking about some of the existing operations that are in the Bay Area and where it might make sense to take the projects under Innovate 680 and have them operated under an existing, the express lane operations, the freeway operations center. Those first projects have natural synergies to be operated. So those are the ones highlighted in green, or sorry, in orange and yellow. And then you start thinking about the second kind of phase of projects, or tiering this into 2 different sections. second set of projects really kind of lend themselves to existing local operations, transit operations, and one third one that doesn't exist today, which might be a temporary county transportation agency or county operations center. I'm going to hit on that a little bit more in just 1 second. And this is all keeping in mind that it would take 10 years to get to that long-term right column of having everything operated out of one regional traffic management center, which would be glorious for Innovate 680, but that would take time. So thinking through how this might happen, we've thought through a couple of principles that might make sense to ensure that this is done in an effective and cost-effective manner for the region. So if you go to the next slide. Some of the things that we've thought through is, one, our regional transportation management center is going to take time to implement, a decade. And there could be stepping stones towards that of having some people starting to co-locate, but a true setup could take close to a decade. So the need in the short term is to really maximize existing operations to the extent possible and to use the existing operation that has the most likeness. So for instance, anything that's something that's happening on the freeway that makes sense to happen out of where the freeway operations happen today. And really trying to make sure that we're co-locating and using the existing operations centers, operations contracts, so that we're not reinventing the wheel. We also need to understand which components don't really need to be physically implemented. Which things can be implemented in the cloud to start bringing systems together, which would be another stepping stone to coming towards this regional center if there's a lot that's regionally co-located in the cloud. But as you saw on the second slide, when we highlight that second box, there may be a need to fill some gaps in the existing system with a county operations center. And again, that might not be a brand new center that's built somewhere. That might mean knocking out a couple cubicles somewhere. When they did the first express lanes in the Bay Area, BTA literally just took out 2 cubicles and put it in an operations center. So this isn't necessarily thinking that there's going to be an expansive brand new building with a video wall, but there is going to be a need to have an operations that will fill some of the gaps that don't exist today in our operations and maintenance. So that could look something like 2 to 4 full-time employees working in a physical building that exists today. And it also helps the county and the components that don't happen today in operations and maintenance start coming together and understanding standard operating procedures and really kind of understanding the physical and institutional roles and responsibilities as it folds itself up into a regional traffic management center in 10 years. And lastly, there will always be a need for county operations. This is Innovate 680 in Contra Costa County. So there will always be a need for a role to understand the operations, how it impacts the county, regardless of there being a regional traffic management center. It's going to be important that each one of these components, and particularly Contra Costa County, have its own role in the operations of Innovate 680. Thanks, Stephanie. I think that is my last slide. And I'm going to pass the baton to Danielle.
Thanks, Liz. So Danielle Stanislas, many of you know that I serve as both your stakeholder engagement manager and with Liz as a part of the systems management team. So there's a couple of questions that we would like you all as advisory committee members to weigh in on. And we also want to give you an opportunity if you have specific questions on any of the 3 issues that we covered. We're happy to go back to any of those slides to revisit if you have specific questions or specific points that you want to talk to. But I think we also more broadly want to hear in relation to what Liz just said. We have a couple of key questions that we definitely want to hear from you all on, and I will read those, and they're before you on the screen. So the first is, again, when you step back bigger picture, what role do you see CCTA playing in terms of that overall system operations and when they step into the role of operations and maintenance activities for the whole program? And how do you see that role evolving over time, especially if a longer term solution like a regional transportation management center is pursued? Along those lines, if that regional long-term solution is desired, what are the thoughts that you all have on how the region could work together towards this longer term solution, while of course minimizing some of those throwaway costs, because as we saw, there are distinct project needs for Innovate 680 that are going to be coming online nearer term, and we need to think through how we minimize that throwaway. And then, of course, last but not least, if there are other issues related to O&M that you'd like to discuss, we're of course happy to entertain those. And if we don't have time to talk about all of them today, as you can see also on this slide, we've already cataloged some additional O&M related items that we envision bringing back to you all in subsequent PAC meetings. So with that, Chair Anderson, I will take your assistance as per usual with helping us kind of talk through those 3 questions, as well as if any members want to revisit any of the other issues that we covered.
Would you like me to take down the slides, or would you like to see the questions in front of you? Let me know.
I will
muted.
defer to Chair
Candace, you're muted.
Anderson on that.
You're muted.
Take down the slides, I think.
Okay.
Would be
I think
better.
we're going to need to take down the slides so that we can all see one another. And so let's just go ahead, and why don't we have you, well, I can say the first question because I did do a screenshot of it so that I would remember what it was. So our first question, what role do you see CCTA playing in terms of overall system operations and the O&M activities for the Interstate 680 program? How do you see this role evolving over time, especially for Regional Transportation Management Center is pursued in the long term? So that's the question that we have in front of us. Is this something that we see CCTA having a role in, and if so, what does that look like? Okay, Sue, thank you. Both hands are up.
I know, I was. So I guess my question is, where is Contra Costa County in relation to other counties that are involved in this regional process? I think that will make a big impact on what CCTA plays. Are we ahead of the game on the other areas of the region around us? And if so, then obviously taking a leadership role in that process. If we're behind the scene, behind the game, then I think it really depends on where the region is as a whole in what CCTA plays. I still think, and I think CCTA obviously plays a very crucial role in developing that regional process and representing Contra Costa County in how it works as a region. Because I think individually, I don't think there's anybody else that can do that except for CCTA. So those are my 2 thoughts on that issue.
Well, and I think you raise a really good point too, and it's not only regional, but look at Alameda County, which is really probably our primary partner, both to the south and certainly to the west as well. And then we're talking about Solano, other counties as we head over bridges. So, but that's a great question. Maybe you want to address that first, and then we'll go to your question, Karen Stepper, after that.
Liz, did you want to speak to that?
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute to see if Tim wanted me to respond to that. I would say Contra Costa, so the Regional Traffic Management Center is a new concept. So I would say CCTA is at the forefront on this. And I think Innovate is really sparking and really highlighting the need for it. So I would, forefront. I don't know if Tim wants to add anything.
Okay, and that's helpful to know. If no one else is in that space, it's certainly, I think we're very capable and competent to fill that void. But we need to have the cooperation and the assent of our partners as well, so that we aren't going to different. Okay, Karen Stepper, please go ahead.
So I have a little question. I thought that the first one of those 3 policies had to do with melding the arterials and the freeway, basically. That's not the question that we're on.
Well, I'm reading the questions. You're right. Issue number 1 is harmonizing freeway and arterial operations. But then we have 3 questions that were posed below it that say, what role do you see CCTA playing in terms of
I see. Okay.
But if you want to talk about a little bit harmonizing
freeway. Let me just ask you generally then, okay? Then because I think that there's a lot of room there for people to be upset Because if you're doing something locally and it's slowing people down and they're angry at your council member, but for the whole thing, you're saving 2 minutes. And I think, okay, when I go on Google Maps, I'm going to save 2 minutes. I don't necessarily go that route just because I know the other one, it's familiar. So I'd like to know, when you gave some good examples, you said Albuquerque and Hawaii already had some examples of that working effectively. So I think that'd be great if we could see something where there were actual examples of where we might see conflicts between what the city wants versus the freeway wants when you're the driver from your community, and how they've handled it here. Since it's already been handled, I'd like to learn from those at a future meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, and I will just say I was in Hawaii recently and
Yes.
surprised to find a bus on the shoulder going right by me in this wonderful bus lane that said, high occupancy lane, buses on shoulder between these hours. And it wasn't the bus, which is Hawaii's transit, but it was actually a school bus. And I just thought, wow, where did this bus come from? So anyway, they're doing bus on the shoulder, and I'd be interested to see how they're coordinated. But okay, so
that was a great answer that you just gave, Candace. That's what I'd like to see, some real examples in motion where they've melded their they've defined it well enough how they're affecting the individual driver to meld the problems that you have on the arterial versus the freeway. And I'd like to see some of those examples so that we could share those with our communities.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think it'd be really helpful to identify those in other places. Okay, other comments, question? Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And I appreciate the presentation. It just seems like we're just on the cutting edge of something really new and exciting along the 680 corridor here. And I'm just wondering if this really is going out, I don't know, between 5 and 10 years down the road. Is it possible that CCTA, and I think, extremely talented group, instead of overseeing, maybe it's a combination of overseeing and managing this, but do you envision other companies coming in and actually being able to handle this, where we actually subcontract with a company and we just oversee the maintenance and operations?
Tim's nodding his head. We're going to let Tim answer that. Whether this is something where we're going to potentially bring in a private vendor to manage this, as opposed to government employees and the transportation authority doing the day-to-day operations, which I think is your question, Robert.
Well, CCTA is extremely talented, and Tim and the group, I mean, oh my God, it's amazing what they can do with such a small staff. This almost seems like it would overwhelm CCTA if they had to take this on by itself. I mean, they would have to grow and have a learning curve as well. There may be a company out there that would actually take this on.
So Tim, tell us, inquiring minds want to know.
So there's a couple options, and I think this is why we're having this conversation in terms of evaluating, what the right options might be to fit, the overall system, the overall program. And so I would say that the CCTA, we weren't, if we took on this role, we would have to hire probably a few staff members. We would not staff up and hire, like a whole team, to staff a TMC and an operations center. If we took on any of these roles, we would contract it out, most definitely. And that's not uncommon, for the express lanes and for other types of operations throughout the nation. Contracting out those types of things is not uncommon, and relative to operating some sort of TMC or operations center. And then the other one that's really critical to all of this really being successful is the maintenance piece of it. And so really, to maintain a system like this and maintain the actual performance of the system, you really have to have a contractor or a vendor or a partner that's able to come in and really be incentivized to fix things within hours, not days, not weeks. We're talking about hours. And so implementing performance-based maintenance contract is going to be really key. And so that's also going to be something that we would contract out, if we stepped into this role. And certainly there are, to your point, member store, there are P3 opportunities, for things like this. But that would really require a bigger discussion around P3 legislation and doing P3s on the state highway system, you know, and just over time, you know, Caltrans and others in the state, it's been really challenging to really do P3s, you know, in California because of the environment that we're in California. So I think there'd be a lot of challenges there. It's not impossible, but it would definitely require some project specific legislation to do something like that. And I would tend to lean to probably the first model, where we would probably hire a few staff members and really leverage and contract out with vendors to help operate and maintain the overall system.
Tim, I appreciate that answer. Maybe I should know this. What is P3? What's the definition of P3?
P3 is public-private partnership. So
I didn't know that either. I didn't.
Yeah,
so good company.
Jesus, couldn't we just say that out loud, Tim?
Yeah, public-private partnership. So public-private partnerships is essentially what you do is you hire essentially a developer to come in and really offer a turnkey approach to a project or to a solution. So that developer would finance the project, they would hire the designer, they would hire the contractor, they would finance it, they would operate it, they would maintain it. And it's really a design, build, finance, operate, maintain contract that you would hire with a developer.
Okay, Robert, any more questions, follow-up for Tim?
No, I'll have some in a minute here.
Okay, and I see Sue Luella and then Deb Allen. So Sue, let's go with you first, then Luella, then Deb.
Thanks. Just going back to, you know, hiring an outside entity to do this. One of my questions I wrote down when we were discussing the first one, harmonizing, was how the decisions are made on the trade-offs. And, you know, and this is, I think I've brought this up before in the past on, you know, local traffic versus 680 traffic. Who are the, you know, when we say end of the trip, who are we talking about? Are we talking about commuters? Are we talking about local people? And I think that's where we're going to run into issues. I mean, we have those issues anyway with Taylor Boulevard turning into Pleasant Hill Road between Lafayette, Pleasant Hill, Martinez. I mean, I don't even go into the battles on that one right at this point, but we can't even get Taylor Boulevard squared away and Pleasant Hill Road squared away as far as movement of traffic. How do we make those trade-offs on a regional basis in a fair and equitable manner? And how are those trade-offs made and communicated to whoever the entity is that manages it to do it in a fair and equitable manner? That's my biggest concern of all of this.
I think, Sue, it's shared by all of us. I think every city, you know, to Karen Stepper's point, that's what we're all worried about. You know, at whose expense are you going to make that on-ramp go right in? So
Right.
A very valid point. Tim, I'm sort of turning to you as the head of CCTA. Do you want to comment on Sue's comments before we go into Luella?
So I think, as I meant, so, you know, Stephanie early on talked about that this is really a performance, you know, goal, performance-based program with all of these different types of metrics, right? And so as you start really getting into, and this is something that would have to be a conversation that we would continue as we further develop out the system, but we would really kind of with a group, you know, present basically those trade-offs, those metrics, and we would essentially have to prioritize those things with this group as part of the policy advisory committee. And those would be essentially, you know, it could be based on travel times, it could be based on delay, it could be based on, you know, access to actual different modes of trips. And so, but I think the important thing to really remember here is that we're talking about the really the total trip. And so as Liz Justice mentioned, there might be 2 minutes of wait time here, but you're saving, you know, 5 minutes or 10 minutes on the freeway. So just, and that's a really good example. Like, for example, on in Colorado, I just recently went and visited the I-25 managed freeway project. In that project, the wait times on all of the ramps were actually maximized to only 4 minutes. And I know that 4 minutes can seem like a long time in a car, but then they were actually saving 15 to 30 minutes of travel time savings in the corridor by just having everyone wait 4 minutes at the ramps. And so that's what we're talking about in terms of the in trip and the trade-offs.
I think my concern is those people that are impacted 2 to 4 minutes within, let's say, Pleasant Hill, when they're only going from point A to point B within Pleasant Hill, but because of the priorities for 680, their 5-minute trip is now 9 minutes, even though everybody getting on 680 may save 5 minutes, but the local traffic may be impacted significantly. And I think that's where the trade-off issue in my mind is more problematic than necessarily the wait time on a ramp to get on 680 and then on 680. Those I totally understand. It's that arterial within the city trade-offs that I am more concerned about.
Yeah, sorry, just if I could just respond one moment to that. So in terms of the overall, that's where the connected traffic signal system really comes into play, because it's not just focusing on metering the traffic for the ramp and for the freeway. It's really trying to improve traffic flow on the actual arterials. And so by having this coordinated timing along all the intersections along the arterials, we'll be able to, improve that traffic flow even before you get to the freeway. And hopefully by doing that, for those short trips on 680 potentially, hopefully people are actually using the arterial systems if they're actually coordinated and the traffic was improved on the arterial system.
Okay, Sue, any additional follow-up?
No, I'm gonna, that's just gonna be an ongoing concern.
Yeah.
Pleasant Hill is, as we say, in the center of everything, and sadly, traffic-wise, we end up being in the center of everything. And so it's just gonna be one of those ongoing issues that, clearly if we can get 680 moving smoother, then there's going to be less traffic coming off into Pleasant Hill, cutting off the angles and so on. But if that doesn't really work, then we end up in a problematic situation there. So it's just going to be something I'll just ongoing concern. I'll bring it up again.
And I think hopefully some modeling can give us some of those answers too, because just doing traffic surveys, looking at where people are going in Pleasant Hill, how many are getting on the freeway, length of time, hopefully we can anticipate some of that. Okay, let's jump to Luella. We're still on our first question, Luella, and then we'll go to Deb Allen.
So I completely agree with Sue. Let me just use the word Ignacio Valley. It goes straight back into Clayton. So we have concerns. But my question is, even maybe I missed something in the front of our whole committee, and that is, what is our region? We keep talking about the region, but in the middle of this conversation, I got really confused. Is it 680 through San Jose, through the rest of up north, or is it just in Contra Costa County? And the reason I ask that is I look at CCTA as being a pilot program that that other people could then adapt and fold into. But if we have to do the whole thing all at once, it's a much bigger job and much more complex. So did we ever establish really what we're talking about?
Well, we do have members of Alameda County who sit on this advisory committee, and we do have, for example, with County Connection and LavTech, we already have some joint projects. And as we saw, one project is going all the way from Amtrak down to Dublin BART. And so, Tim, how far south do we go? I mean, I know a lot of us for many years have been advocating, how do we get our workers who live in Contra Costa but work in Silicon Valley to and from their homes? How far south are we going, Tim?
So the project limits for the overall Innovate 680 program is essentially from 580 all the way to basically to the bridge, Benisa Martinez Bridge. So that's pretty much what we study in terms of the project limits and the traffic modeling and everything like that. And you are right, this would be a pilot program. And so this program once there's a proof of concept established, then the goal would be to expand that proof of concept, beyond the borders of Contra Costa County. And that's where the I-680 corridor partnership really comes into play. And by having those meetings and coordinating with Solano, coordinating with Alameda, and even coordinating with Santa Clara, going all the way down to San Jose. So that's really where that corridor partnership comes to play. And through that partnership, we do share what we're doing with Innovate 680 and have lots of conversations in terms of transit and technology and the highway project, et cetera. And then I think when we're talking about this regional TMC, now we're really kind of getting to a much bigger, the overall Bay Area region, where this RTMC would be for the Bay Area region, but Innovate 680 would be the pilot for that RTMC, right? And so, and there would be also, integrating some of the existing TMC functions that are already occurring today. For example, MTC operates the regional operations center they call the ROC. Caltrans operates the Caltrans Transportation Management Center, the TMC. So there's already existing systems in play that would have to be integrated from a Bay Area wide standpoint. But this idea of doing automated control and delegated control and all these policies, Innovate 680 would really be the pilot within the regional TMC.
So my follow-up question is, if we make CCTA the head pilot for the first, say, 5 or 6 years, is that even feasible within the capacity of CCTA?
So it's going to take a long time to implement this regional TMC, and you can tell from the implementation chart in terms of timing, we're talking about a 5 to 10 year time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think, one of the biggest issues relative to operations and maintenance is funding. And that, right? So and ongoing funding, right, for the overall program. And so that's where, we would have to coordinate with our regional partners, Caltrans, MTC, but quite honestly, that's where, a potential new, measure for Contra Costa County, a big component of that would be potential operations and maintenance for something like Innovate 680, and also the expansion of Innovate 680 to other highways like Highway 4, 24, 80, 242, et cetera.
Okay, let's go to Deborah, and then Darren will go to you after Deborah Allen.
Well, thank you. So this is exciting conversation to me, because coordination is something that I've always seen as somewhat lacking in transportation, and the fact that we're even all here talking about it is exciting to me. One question, and I have a couple of other comments, probably for Tim. I know that we're talking about the coordination and connectivity of arterials and 680. Do you envision this work also sort of going into the connectivity of the express buses to the transit system and the timing of those things? Or are we really just talking about traffic here?
So if you remember the system diagram that Liz brought up, so there are elements of this relative to connection protection. So protecting those connections between different modes, between transit and BART, and also the transit priority systems. So making sure that we're prioritizing transit through the signal systems, through the freeway systems, using either dedicated lanes or queue jumping lanes, et cetera, to make sure that we're maintaining those connections based on the connection protection policies that we would set forth in the future. So there is an element of transit coordination to this, and not just necessarily focused on cars and traffic flow.
So I thank you, and I'm happy to hear that, because I think oftentimes there isn't enough coordination between the agencies with respect to getting people where they need to go, and when people have to switch modes from, say, a bus to BART or other things to BART and back off of BART, when they have to switch modes and they have to wait a long time, that's when we lose people, right? We become much less reliable, and that's when people make a different choice and they choose to get in their car instead of giving transit and buses and things a shot. So I'm happy to hear you say that, and that's part of the the modeling. I wanted to just go back to the question, and it's not on the screen anymore. And it was, gosh, a long time ago when you put that question up there. But I think
I can read it to you again. Deborah.
Yeah, would you read it again?
Yeah, the first question is, what role do you see CCTA playing in terms of overall system operations and O&M activities for the Innovate 680 program? How do you see this role evolving over time, especially if a regional transportation management center is pursued for the long term? So essentially, I think what we're being asked, what role is CCTA going to have going forward if we pursue this?
So I want to answer that question, just, what I think. I think that we have a lot of really innovative people at CCTA, and just the idea that we're all sitting here talking about something new that really is a pilot of maybe something that hasn't been hardly touched anywhere. I think it sounds like a good idea, and I think that the role of CCTA should be to carry forward, in a lead role with this. I think it kind of was the brainchild of CCTA, and it should continue to be managed that way. I would love to see us move forward, and this is realizing this is the very, very bottom level of the discussion, and that things will evolve over time, and these things take a very long time to evolve into something that is really up and running and working. But I think it's important that we're all coming together with new ideas, and that we're looking for a new way to manage our transportation, and 680, of course, is so important to our county.
Okay, thank you, Deborah.
I'm not going to answer the other part about how it evolves, because I think there's a whole lot more discussion that has to happen about, all of this before we, talk about how it evolves.
Okay, but definitely the integral role needs to be there. Okay, welcome, Darren. Please go ahead with your comments.
Hi, yeah. For those that don't remember, I'm Darren Henderson. I'm the corridor manager for the consultant team. So I work with Liz and Danielle. I just wanted to follow up actually on the comments that Tim was making regarding sort of the program. The reason we're having this discussion is because it really is necessary because of the various projects and strategies that we are proposing to put in place in the corridor. CARM, the part-time transit lane, the express bus, the shared mobility hubs, the arterial coordination. These are all strategies that require operations and maintenance strategies to be in place in order for them to be successful. And they also require traffic management centers or some aspect of traffic management in order for them to be successful. So it's great that this conversation is highlighting the challenges that we're going to face as we move forward and implementing these. But one of the goals that we're trying to accomplish with the Innovate 680 program, and the reason we're talking about this from the perspective of a regional traffic management center, is we want to try and harness the synergies that a lot of these projects have. That diagram that Liz had up, that red square in the middle that sort of highlights the core elements. We really want to bring as many of those elements together as we can into a consolidated traffic management system, so we don't end up with multiple entities trying to run individual components and them not necessarily working very well together. And so while there's certainly a lot of discussion that will need to take place in terms of what makes the most sense and who leads it, who operates it, is that a contractor, or is that staff from one of the other partner agencies? Those are all decisions that we can certainly make over time, and it can also evolve into different ways. What I really encourage all of you to think about is that there is a necessary decision that has to be made. We really want to make sure that Innovate 680 can work successfully as a program. So we do need to be moving toward coming up with some sort of a coordinated traffic management center, however that is structured, in order to ensure that the program can be successful. Thank you.
Sorry, slow to do that. Thank you for that perspective, Darren. Luella, you've got your hand up again. Follow up, please go ahead.
Thank you. As Darren was talking, I was thinking about airplanes and how we manage all of the flights coming and going and what happens when they have incidents here and COVID there. Is that the system, is that an analogous system to what you were talking about?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, to put it even more simply, the left hand needs to know what the right hand's doing with some of these programs. You know, we can't have, for example, a part-time transit lane functioning and not have that system communicating with the ramp meters or, you know, with other aspects of the freeway operations and expect those systems to be able to operate effectively and harmoniously. The same thing as Tim was actually the question was raised, I think, by Sue, you know, concerned about how the managed freeways program or the CARM aspect of the managed freeways program and the ramp metering would cause delay to people making shorter trips. Actually, if we can flip, what happens when freeways become really congested is it sort of flips the orientation on how we prioritize the use of the network. And actually what happens is a lot of that freeway traffic then spills into your arterial networks and is causing the arterial networks to be jammed up. And then they can't operate very effectively. So what we try to do with these types of systematic approaches is get the freeway to function the way it's supposed to, get it moving those longer distance trips, get that cut through traffic off of the local arterial systems so that then the local arterial systems can serve their function. And if you are making a short trip, you know, 1 or 2 miles, it can be served more effectively on the local arterials. And if we have all of those systems being managed in a regional TMC structure, the operators can see when the system is actually functioning the way it is. The left hand can see that, you know, the right hand is now available to do something, and we can have the system operate more effectively and efficiently. So yeah, your air control analogy is sort of similar. We need to be able to make sure that all of those pieces are working together effectively. When that plane lands, it needs to have ground control to tell it which gate it needs to go to, or else it's just going to sit on the runway and block the runway for the next person, the next plane that's going to land.
Okay, any other comments on this one? I think so far what you're hearing, Sue, we're not going to stop yet on question 1. Go ahead.
My only point is the last part of the question is, you know, the development long going. At this point, you know, CCTA, every time we talk, we have a, you know, end date at this point of 2034. So, you know, this is a system that we're building for way in the future. And so then we also have to think about, we all hope CCTA goes much further than 2034, but we also have to realize at this point, that's kind of the end date. So I mean, that's where the funding ends, right? So we have to take that into account into saying, you know, CCTA is going to do this long term. We have to make sure CCTA is still there long term in order to do those things. So I just wanted to bring up that one last point.
Because we all love a sales tax measure. Thank you, Sue. Okay. Any other? Oh, Tim, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on that real quick, because I think that's a really important point, you know, in terms of the funding. And I was kind of reiterating that earlier, but I just want to be sure that everyone understands, and this is sometimes a common confusion, is that when our measure ends, CCTA does not disappear. I just want to make that really clear. We still are going to be the congestion management agency for the county. We still do receive regional, state, and federal funds. Like, for example, Solano Transportation Authority does not have a sales tax. They do not have a sales tax at all, and they never have. And they're still able to perform, you know, similar functions that CCTA does today. So it is kind of a common thing that we hear, even internal with our own staff and CCTA. So CCTA is here to stay. We're permanently going to be here. It's really just a funding issue. That's really what it is. And so when Measure J ends in 2034, then there's different roles that CCTA will be taking on. So it's really important. Like I said, the most important aspect to O&M is going to be funding it. That's going to be one of the number one priorities as we kind of look down the long road.
And hopefully, because it would be a pilot program, there will be grants available, all kinds of ways to fund it other than going out to voters to try to pass an increased sales tax. So we'll see. Okay, I think what you're hearing from this is, yes, CCTA needs to play an integral role, but we still are cautious about this because of the impact on our roads, which doesn't speak so much to CCTA. It speaks to the fact that we're cautious about this because of the impact on our local roads. So let's move on to the second question, unless anyone has anything else they'd like to articulate on this one. Okay, second question. If an RTMC is desired, how can the region work together towards this longer-term solution while minimizing throwaway costs? So let's define throwaway costs. Who came up with throwaway costs? Is that meaning we're just wasting money because we spin circles or we don't bring in the right partners? No, none of us want to see that. So tell us what you mean by throwaway costs.
I'll jump in and answer that one. And I think it's really important looking, if you recall the slide that had the pieces, the short term, the long term, and the short, medium, and long term. So really what we're talking about is as CARM is implemented, not building an operation center just for CARM. That would be a throwaway cost. So in the interim, using to the extent possible any kind of existing operations, or if there's that need for a little hole that needs to be filled, doing it with a light touch, using some kind of existing real estate. So throwaway cost would be, in my mind, standing up an operations center that would not be in use in 10 years.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Well, and I have a question before I go to my colleagues. Have we really explored whether or not the existing RTMCs that are already out there going would have interest in expanding and taking this on before we start from the ground level of creating our own? And so, Tim, I think that's a Tim question, unless our consultants have a better perspective on that.
So I don't know, maybe Liz can jump in on this one a little bit, but in terms of the from the ground level all the way to the future, it's really important to establish, I think establish the roles and responsibilities, right? I mean, that's really what's going to be really key to this. And you can even see, in that chart that was shown to you, there's still a role for Caltrans, MTC, CHP, and so I think it's really that CCTA would really be focusing on really kind of integrating the regional operations with the local operations. That's really that gap that exists today, and that a real focus to that. So I don't know if Darren or Liz want to jump in, but that's really that's actually really what we're focused on here in terms of the ground level.
Yeah, Liz looked like she might have had an internet problem when she finished that last answer. So just in case, and at risk of putting David Mann on the spot, I actually think that you're right, Madam Chairman. The question really hasn't been answered yet. There certainly is the possibility that the Caltrans TMC or the ROC or one of the other entities that's out there could serve some of those functions. The regional traffic management center doesn't necessarily have to take on all of those functions, for all of the projects that we're doing as part of the program. But as that graphic that Liz was referring to was trying to illustrate, we need to go through that evolution process to, first of all, deal with the immediate need of operating these systems as they come on stream, and then figuring out, well, what is the most sensible path in terms of the end game? Does it all result in a single regional traffic management center that consolidates all of those functions? Or do we still have a couple of different traffic management centers that serve different purposes, but are collaborating very closely together in order to ensure that the function is still seamless? As Tim pointed out, I think there's every expectation that Caltrans will still continue to operate a TMC. They have a specific purpose and function for that operation. I think there's similarly an expectation that there'll be a ROC of some kind to manage, in particular, the express lanes. But it's very possible that we could nest CARM, as an example, in one of those existing centers and have that operate very effectively, and then have some of these other elements of the program, some of the more innovative, unusual, atypical type elements operated by the RTMC in conjunction with Caltrans. And it could be co-located in the same facility. So yeah, those are definitely the sort of questions that we'll want to tackle as we go through this process and sort of map out what does that journey look like.
Perfect, because to me, that's critical that we not reinvent the wheel.
Exactly. We absolutely don't want to, as Liz was pointing out, we don't want to create throwaway where we're going beyond what we need, either in the short term, midterm, or long term, and creating redundancy. At the same time, we don't want to put a burden onto one of the existing entities if it's not the appropriate place to be able to handle that. So we want to look for where those synergies exist. We want to be able to consolidate and maximize the existing infrastructure, the existing facilities that we have, and then where there's a void, look to fill that with an additional, RTMC that takes on those other functions.
Well, and I think that, to me, that's the purpose of a pilot, is to figure that out. And so I would strongly recommend that we look for those partnerships during the pilot phase. And then if we determine that doesn't have the capacity we need, then we look at creating something more standalone as needed. But to me, I would hate to see us doing that otherwise. Other comments from my fellow commissioners or anyone in the public? Not seeing any hands up. Let's jump then down to our third questions before us. Are there any other policy issues related to O&M that you'd like to discuss and you haven't discussed already? We're such a bashful group. No one wants to. I'm saying that very facetiously. Anything else that, with regard to this, that we haven't already said, no way you're going to do that to my community? Okay, I am not seeing any additional hands. So let's move on then. And I think hopefully to our consultants, to Tim, do you feel like you've had some valuable feedback?
Definitely, Chair Anderson. And so this is Danielle. I actually do have just a couple more slides to kind of put a bow on this item in terms of articulating where we go next before we move to the next item. So Stephanie, if you could call that up again. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So as you all have clearly demonstrated, this is a hearty conversation for which it is not a one and done. Go to the next slide, please, Stephanie. So I'm revisiting what Liz shared at the beginning in terms of just reminding you that we know and are holding ourselves accountable to that there are some additional policy issues that arose out of the development of the ConOps that we are also continuing to confront as we think through the implementation plan. And we will be bringing those back to you a couple at a time, as Liz and I have been doing. And down in the right-hand corner, the reason why there's that different color is because this O&M conversation in particular, for all the reasons you all just articulated, and to the point about sustainable funding for operations, we know that we are going to be coming back to you all with a continuing series of conversations, because this conversation is important that it's occurring with you all, but it also, as you all were alluding to, needs to be occurring with the other partner agencies that also have skin in the game from an O&M standpoint, like our regional partners like Caltrans, MTC, CHP. So Stephanie, can you go to the next slide? So this is a sort of look ahead as to where these O&M conversations are going to be going and how this relates to our overall Innovate 680 organizational structure. And I will just make mention, because I think there was a question towards the very beginning by one of you about whether there are other counties in the Bay Area that are trying to do something similar or undertaking similar efforts when it comes to thinking about multimodal corridor operations. And while there might be some other counties that are making strides on this, like Alameda, what I would say is that from an institutional standpoint, Innovate 680 is very different. You have that institutional structure and formalized collaboration with your partner agencies sitting at the table, forming groups like the program leadership team, where you have the deputy executive directors of Caltrans District 4 alongside the chief of Golden Gate Division CHP and the deputies of operations at MTC, sitting with CCTA staff and talking through and thinking through these very issues that are before you all. So that in and of itself provides a structure from an institutional standpoint that I would say is quite different from what's going on in some of the other counties. So what you see here are some of the technical milestones at the top, and this implementation plan that we're working on takes the actionable steps from that visionary program ConOps document. And we're looking to have a final draft of that around the August timeframe. How that relates to these O&M conversations is very key, because these are front and center for what we think about when we say implementing Innovate 680 and having it be sustainable, even if certain pieces are just in pilot form. And so how that relates to some of our ongoing conversations, you can see your quarterly PAC meetings, but you can also see that we'll be working with your staff, and that they sit on the TAC ConOps working group, your technical staff, and those groups will be meeting regularly to solicit their feedback in that collaborative setting. But we're also planning to have a series of individual meetings, because each of these agencies has their own specific concerns, as we were hearing from some of you today. And we want to have an opportunity to talk through and work through those. You all also have some different types of owner-operator responsibilities, like when we talk about Caltrans versus talking about a local agency versus talking about a transit operator. And we need to be able to have the space to talk through some of those specifics. So we're allowing for that. The program leadership team, as I mentioned, they also meet quarterly, and they inform the executive steering committee. And that is the first time that this committee is going to be meeting. The executive steering committee consists of Tim Hale, your director from CCTA, the chief deputy, the district director of Caltrans District 4, and the chief deputy of operations from MTC. And we're really looking to engage that group and really have some frank conversations about where the program has come in these last couple of years of development and what strides we can take, especially related to some of these key policy issues for O&M. We'll also be cycling back and working with the cities in terms of having some city council meeting presentations. And I do want to stress that Tim is planning to do these council presentations for all the jurisdictions in Contra Costa. So it's not that these would be only focused on Innovate 680 or only focused on O&M, but for those city councils and for those jurisdictions that are a part of Innovate 680, you can expect that there will be some additional discussion relative to all the conversation that we've had today. So hopefully this gives you a snapshot of just understanding all the different meetings and groups that are at play, because they all have a role in this bigger O&M conversation, and it is going to be a continuing conversation. So with that, Chair Anderson, I will turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So you had some additional information. Any more questions, any more comments from any member of the committee? Not seen any, anyone from the public. And Danielle, I am assuming, or Terrian, actually, we don't have any public comments that we've received in writing.
No public comments have been received, and I don't see any virtual hands either.
Great. Well, and if you think of something, you can always contact Danielle Stanislaus too and give her additional feedback. Or if you discuss it with your city managers, other council members, you can certainly provide that feedback. But I appreciate that, Tim, you are going to be meeting with our city councils. As we recognize, we do have Alameda County representatives. Our presentation is going to be made to their jurisdictions through Alameda's Transportation Authority. Or Tim, is that something you're going to be doing? How is that going to work?
I'm actually still coordinating that with Alameda CTC, but yeah, the intent is actually to have presentations to those affected cities along our corridor footprint.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so I'm going to move on then. We do have some correspondence. You were all provided with Innovate 680 issue 4 newsletter for fall and winter 2021, stakeholder talking points. Any comments, questions from anyone about those? Okay, I am not seeing any of those. Then we will go ahead and adjourn to our next meeting, which is now scheduled for April 13th. Oh, I'm sorry, Scott, you suddenly just popped up with lots of hands. Okay, please go ahead.
I wasn't responding to the question you asked, but I saw that this was on the agenda as a time when committee members can make comments. And so I just wanted to point out, as you're probably aware, because you sit on TVTC with me, and I know some of the other members have sat in the past, that in our proposed funding plan, starting in 2022-23, we have the Innovate 680 in our spending plan for $5.7 million over 2 years, and those 2 years would be FY 23-24 and FY 24-25. That would be 3.4 million in 23-24 and 2.8 million in 24-25. So we'll stay in touch with you on those, but at the beginning of that fiscal year, working with the sponsor is San Ramon. So you work with us and we will put the letter into the TVTC to approve the disbursement in, that would be in July of 2023 for 3.4 million and July of 2024 for 2.9 million.
And thank you, Scott, for pointing that out, who has chaired TVTC and serves on the finance committee, as you can tell. Okay, any other board comments related to anything regarding our 680 corridor that you wish to articulate this evening? Okay, I am not seeing any. So at this point, I'm sorry, Tarianne, go ahead. I apologize. Did I skip? Oh, I skipped one thing, the minutes. I apologize. I was reading a script that had the wrong minute dates. It really was the October minutes that we were approving as opposed to the June, and we're going to correct that. Tarianne, do you have anything else?
Yeah, and just one more thing. We are anticipating returning to in-person meetings, probably hybrid meetings in April for our next meeting. So I just wanted to throw that out there now so that everyone is aware that that is the plan for the next meeting.
Terrific. And hopefully there will be that hybrid option. So Sue, if you're up at Sea Ranch or someplace else, you can still participate. But I hope that CCTA, like most of our agencies, we're trying to figure out how the state's going to allow us to balance those. So thank you for pointing that out. It would be great to see all of you in person. It's been a long time. Okay. Karen, do you have a question or, oh, you're just saying goodbye. Karen's out of here. Okay. Good night, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. And thank you for your robust participation. Always good.
Thank you.
Thank you.